Welcome to Narayana IAS Academy, your one-stop destination for making UPSC dream a reality. I welcome you to today's DNA, where we break down all the UPSC relevant articles from the Hindu, that's the Hyderabad edition, and the Indian Express for today, that's 27th April 2025. And before we start looking at today's important news pieces from both the newspapers for the prelims and mains, here as a protocol, there is a small quote to motivate you to study better and ace your exams. And the motivation goes, it says that it takes time to achieve something. And here time is definitely not just about clocking your efforts. It's about patience, because without patience, without perseverance, no hard work bears fruit. So not only do we need to work hard persistently, but then also we need to have faith that every process takes its time and success is round the corner if we continue on the same note. And now let me quickly show you the articles that we need to analyze for today's analysis session. The topics for the day are total 4. The first one, as you can see on your screen, is relevant for UPSC mains, and we are talking about the recent claim made by India. Now, India has claimed a new modified demand, that is to increase its territorial limit on the continental shelf by around 10,000 square kilometers. Why is it relevant? Because we need to see a little bit of historical development behind this. Back in 2021, when India had made a similar claim to the UNCLOS, Pakistan had objected. It said that since there is a certain area corresponding to Gujarat and the Sindh province in Pakistan, that happens to be a huge maritime border dispute between the two countries, India's claims are not valid, and therefore, as per the recommendation of the UN, India has now made a new claim. So let's understand why this claim is important. Why is it relevant from the perspective of the blue economy that India is foreseeing to become a big leader of? Now this is of course the Hindu page number 9, the Hyderabad edition. The other 3 articles are all prelims bits for your exam. The second one here is the Hindu page number 10. We are talking about a very happy initiative when it comes to Indian innovation and startup culture, because here India's first company, that is Sarvam AI, has now made headlines because the government has agreed to give it funding to make India's own indigenous AI model. So what is the relevance of AI technology when we talk about large language models? Let's quickly understand a little bit of technical aspect. Let's understand why could it bring more innovation and better economic growth for India. The third article is the Hindu page number 12. We are talking about the Simla Agreement. Now, why is this coming in news once again is because, as we all know, in the last few days, on and on, after the attacks in Jammu and Kashmir, Pakistan has been reiterating that if India can go back on the Indus Water Treaty, then we can also go back on many other bilateral agreements, and the Simla Agreement happens to be one of those. So what does it mean for the international ties between both the countries? Are we really looking at a worse prospect of deteriorating relationships? So that is something we must get into. A little bit more nuance about what was the agreement back when it was signed in the 1970s and what's the relevance today. The last article talks about a Sola Bhati Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, not only is it an important place in the news, but also this new idea of the Indian government of removing all the conventional vehicles from creating pollution in this natural biodiversity spot, but replacing the entire usage of conventional vehicles with electronic vehicles. All the logistical work, all the supply chain relevant work will be done through the EV model. Can it be a good role model for many other biodiversity spots in India? Let's quickly have a look, and on that note, let's dive into the first article in a bit lengthier detail. So here the article says India is raising continental shelf claim in the Arabian Sea region. So as we mentioned earlier, the article is relevant from the point of view of your UPSC prelims because we are talking about important agreements such as the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea, the UNCLOS. And of course, we are talking about, in general, the Indian Ocean region. Given India's political command in the region, given the fact that India's location in the IOR region brings it a lot of strategic significance. We'll see how this new claim is in line with India's blue economic policy. Okay, and with that, before we actually start deep diving in the article, here's one question coming from UPSC Civil Services Exam 2022, UPSC Mains. It talks about how maritime security challenges of India are relevant. It also says discuss organizational, technical, procedural initiatives taken by India to improve its maritime security. Now, this is exactly a juncture where we can say such questions hold huge prominence. Even in this year mains exam, such questions could definitely be repeated in, albeit a little bit of a different terminology. Given the recent India-Pakistan skirmish, we know that maritime security and bilateral relations are absolutely in spotlight. So therefore, India-Pakistan maritime ties are something we must look into very, very deeply. So let's first see the context of the article. Well, the article is coming precisely in the context of the recent Jammu and Kashmir controversy. India has submitted a new claim. Why is it new? Because earlier when India had made a claim, a similar claim in 2021, Pakistan had said that no, India's claim is completely against the international law. Because whichever territory India is claiming towards is a conflicted territory which overlaps with Pakistan's maritime border, and hence the United Nations, in fact more specifically UNCLOS and the special wing of UNCLOS, that is United Nations Commission on the Limits of Continental Shelf, the CLCS, had told India that go back and revamp your claim. Work on it in such a way that it avoids all the territorially disputed regions with Pakistan. And given that, India did some homework, and now India is back making a fresh claim. And under the claim, India is demanding a 10,000 square kilometer extension of its maritime area in the heart of the Arabian Sea. So for India, it is definitely a very clean ask, because it deliberately has focused on avoiding any maritime territorial overlapping region with Pakistan. Okay, so all overlaps were avoided here as India made this claim. So this is coming as a very strategic move. Strategic move because not only is the area extremely resourceful, but also it is important because it deliberately neglects, it tries to cut away from the long-standing, the age-old dispute that both the nations, India and Pakistan, have had on the Sir Creek's territory. So we'll also look into a little bit of what exactly is the Sir Creek territory, and then this entire demand that India is making today to the CLCS is a part of its revamping strategy in the Indian Ocean region, given the sheer geostrategic importance of the area. So before we now go and see that what's the future looking like and what's the response of the CLCS, first it's very important to be clear with the terminology. What do we really mean by the continental shelf? So it is basically an area that is under the water, that's under the ocean. It's a submerged part of land, and it's an extension, just a stretch of a given country's territory, the land area, but the one that is submerged in the ocean. So usually it's about 200 nautical miles. That's considered the EEZ boundary. Okay, but sometimes it can also extend further if a country has sufficient evidence to prove that its land area is extending further in the ocean, and then fresh claims can definitely be made, just like India has done right now. Okay, another thing is the EEZ, which we need to understand as the exclusive economic zone. Now, up to 200 nautical miles from the baseline, from your territorial baseline, you as a country have all the rights for fishing, exploration, or any kind of naval experiment, any kind of mining, natural gas, oil, mineral exploration in this EEZ. So typically, no other country could come and intervene in this, because it is an exclusive area that's given to you for your own economic and your own geographic exploration. Having said that, there's another concept important to know, which is your ECS, that is Extended Continental Shelf, which is also under question in this given article here. This goes beyond the EEZ, the one that we just saw. Why? Because if a country has sufficient evidence, if it has certain satellite proofs, if it has certain researched proofs which validate the fact that a country's territory is well extending into the seabed, it's just a natural extension of a country's original landmass, then a country can go ahead and make more claims. Okay, so this further gives you right to use all the resources that are located in and around that particular seabed area. So that is something we need to understand with regards to this article, and that also is the reason why India has made this claim in the first place, which of course we are yet to see that what's the response that comes post this demand. Because for India, as I said, it's a very clean ask. It has accommodated the Sir Creeks dispute too. But now before we get into the Sir Creeks dispute, to understand the article more contextually, what do we really mean by the CLCS, as I just said? So we all know about the UNCLOS. So CLCS is UN body responsible for examining whether a country's legitimate claims over a particular continental shelf are valid or not. So every country needs to take approval from the CLCS, and it will do some kind of a monitoring, some kind of an examination to prove the real legitimacy of a country's demand. And only after approval a country shall gain any kind of independent autonomous rights over exploring, exploiting all the natural resources, all the polymetallic nodules that lie on the seabed for its own economic growth and to various industry. Now CLCS also we need to understand that although it is a very important approving agency, but then it's not an arbitration agency, because CLCS will not resolve any existing maritime boundary disputes. That is not something that's under the ambit of CLCS jurisdiction, but definitely although the disputes need to be bilaterally or mutually solved by the concerned states, concerned countries, but CLCS definitely will give its final verdict on whether the claim made by a country is valid or not. Okay, now having said that, why has India made such a claim, and what relevance does such kind of extension of jurisdiction over a sea area give you as an emerging economy? So India's claim, a little bit of historic purview if we take, then as I said, the first claim long back was made in 2009, and during that time when India had made this claim to the CLCS, India had demanded some parts of the Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea as an extension of its natural land territory under the sea. The aim was to just get the rights, some kind of an exploration ability over these regions which are teeming with natural resources. Now we all know that today India is also one country which is moving in a very fast manner towards achieving the 2030 goal, the SDG of controlling your carbon emissions by 33%. And in that light, we know that Indian government is making a very huge pitch towards natural gas-based economy. So this also is in light with that. Okay. Now recent developments say that in 2021 we already know the claim was objected to by Pakistan. So now India has modified the claim, both the 2009 claim and the 2021 claim. The recent claim made by India is about 10,000 square kilometers. That's a little bit revised. It's much lesser than the previous claim. And this, as per Indian authorities, is completely based out of scientific investigation. It's completely evidential. Okay? And deliberately, India has made sure that the area of the Sir Creek territory, that's a maritime disputed boundary between India and Pakistan, is not included here to avoid any kind of overlaps in the process. So then what do we exactly mean by the Sir Creek dispute? So let's understand that Sir Creek happens to be a very natural tidal estuary, and in a very geographic sense. Now I'll show you a picture here to give you a better illustrative look, and it also serves as therefore a kind of dividing line between Gujarat in India, as you can see here, and the Sindh province of Pakistan. Okay, so the sheer strategic location that comes exactly in between the two countries as a thin, it is like barely about say 96 kilometers or so. So it is this that's under question. It's situated in the Run of Kutch area between India and Pakistan, and that's the whole reason why it becomes a very disputed territory, because Pakistan says that it lies within Pakistan's maritime area, so India should not make claims on that. Okay, so that this narrow estuary portion as depicted here in the picture is the main problem between the two nations for a very long time now. So today, as India has made this new claim, India has made sure that it is avoiding such contested regions, and ultimately the bigger aim for India, if you see, is to create a very clear cut, to create a very, very valid identification of its maritime international borders, so that in future such overlaps and such conflicts can be avoided. Now we already know that India Pakistan right now are going through a very rough spot given the recent intrusion and the recent killings that happened in Kashmir. So we know that both the countries are not sharing a stable bilateral relationship. Now in that light, of course, India would never want that another maritime dispute goes green at the moment, because also we know from the recent 2 days articles and the recent 2 days news that the Indus Valley Treaty is also under question. So today Pakistan is definitely threatening that we will take back all the treaties that exist between the two countries, and hence I think this claim by India is pretty valid, because it deliberately tries to avoid any such maritime confrontation, because that's not something that anybody can afford in such a difficult situation already. Okay, now having said that, before we actually close the article, let's also quickly 2-3 words upon what is then the exact difference between the UNCLOS of 1982 and the CLCS. So as I told you, UNCLOS, or the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, is a much broader legal framework that governs at an international level all the usage of oceans and seas by various nations. But when we talk about the CLCS, then CLCS stands for Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, and it is a very specialized, a smaller cell body within the UNCLOS, which helps decide and determine the exact outer limits of a country's coastal continental shelf, okay, so that such disputes and overlaps can be avoided. And with that, now we can proceed with the second important article of the day. And as I said earlier, this is quite a happy news for India's startup culture, startup ecosystem, pretty much in line with Atmanirbhar Bharat and the Skill India campaign. The article highlights the great development where one of Bengaluru based startups known as Sarvam AI has now received approval from the Indian government to create its own massive, large AI model. That's artificial intelligence based language model. So let's quickly see what is the application of this entire development for the UPSC exam, and in general, what really does it mean as a huge shot in the arm for India's own research, innovation, self-sufficiency in the AI domain. Now this is pretty important for your prelims exam, because many questions are often based upon artificial intelligence, the use of machine learning. Of course, not only in generating jobs, but also the usage of AI in agriculture, education, healthcare parallelly. Then also it's important because, as I said, from 2015 onwards, Indian government has been quite particular about making sure that India goes towards innovation and there's more domestic startup culture that's propagated. So in that light, this article comes to just show the importance of self-ability in the AI domain. And before we actually delve deep into the article, here's a question from UPSC 2020 prelims. It also talks about artificial intelligence, so you can expect similar questions in future years also. The question says, with the present state of development, artificial intelligence can effectively do which of these following tasks? And then you have certain options which are like energy, electricity consumption, or the next one is short stories and entertainment, songs, the third is medical disease diagnosis, the fourth is text to speech conversation, and the last one is wireless transmission of electric energy. So you need to figure out which of these are valid. Of course, we know that AI is a wonderful intervention that could be used across all these domains, not only to expedite the work process, but also to make it more accurate, to make it more professional. And in that light, let's see what Saksham AI is up to. So the Indian government is now, as I said, taking a major initiative towards creating self-sufficiency, your own independent ability towards AI, artificial intelligence, and its use across various domains. And of course, it is highlighted by India's government mission known as India AI Mission. So in light of this mission, of course, the recent development talks volumes about the government's focus in this area, that Sarvam AI has now become the first such company, the first such organization in India to get direct government financial support to create indigenous, self-made, homegrown large language model, the LLM that we call it, which would specialize only in vernacular languages, that's Indian native languages, and voice-based applications. So we all also know that India, given a very polycultural country that it is, we have, say, more than hundreds of dialects and languages of our own. And yet, in a very conventional usage of AI, people need to depend upon English. So here it comes as a major revolution because it cuts across the inability of many people to understand, interpret, and be comfortable in English. So for them, this kind of local language modification of the AI application would do wonders. Okay, and also today we are looking at enhancing our technological capacity, independence, autonomy, making sure that India becomes a linguistically inclusive country. So again, this reminds me of the new education policy 2020 also. Now, if you remember, in the new education policy of 2020 also, we have given a major impetus towards vernacular languages, and I think the government has made it compulsory for primary education up till 8th grade at least to be allowed in the local vernacular language. And now this development also talks about something similar, that you can use AI language models of a large scale, large volume, and you could use it even in your own language. So that talks volumes about Atmanirbhar Bharat and our focus on this. Now, before we actually are able to appreciate this new intervention, we should also know then what do we mean by the large language model in general. So please understand that LLM, or the large language model, is nothing but an advanced form of AI system which can understand and create exactly human-like text. Not only text, also it can interpret audios, videos, imagery. Voice modulation is also a possibility now. So here it is dependent on the use of huge neural networks. And it depends on vast amount of web data. Okay, so this is how the LLM, or the large language model, works. Completely a system where AI systems could generate a text result, something very, very similar to what a human would do. No wonder it's called the neural networking, okay, because of its capacity that simulates human thinking. Also, let's understand that since it is using huge amount of web data to give AI generated text, it has the ability to process things which are visual in nature, audio prompts, imagery, voices. So that is something we need to understand now. So since we know that it is a special kind of infrastructure, today it just shows how applications like chatbots, now we are already talking about the Gemini, or we already talk about the Chat GPT. So such chatbots, virtual assistants, translation services, or just for creating relevant content could have again massive applications across various domains, and hence this entire achievement is quite important there. And now let's quickly talk about India's AI mission. So it is a very focused initiative by the Indian government with the purpose of creating indigenous, domestic, artificial intelligence based models to create a massive public database to make sure that not only is AI innovation able to help us across multiple domains, be it agriculture, healthcare, education, industry, manufacturing. Apart from that, also making sure that there is AI safety involved here. Now, what also we need to understand is that these entire data structures, since they are massive, they are based on huge amount of data usage, they are based on a very special infrastructure that's referred to as the graphic processing unit, the GPU infrastructure. And the government has therefore set up AI computer clusters to make sure that it's very easy for various Indian companies, startups to access these databases for information, for doing research, or any kind of innovation that they need to do for promoting, creating, or enhancing a established business. In this regard, it's also important to know about the AI Kosh. Now, Kosh typically means a library or a collection of material. So here we say that the government is running an open data portal where more than 350 data sets are already created just to help further in developing the AI structures. Similarly, We are also focusing under the India AI mission on something that's referred to as AI Safety Institute. Now we know that there are a lot of controversies about AI usage. So hence the government is also making sure that there are technologies which ensure safe, responsible, ethical usage of AI across various domains. Of course, it will have collaboration with state-of-the-art institutes like the IITs and other research institutions. Now, sometimes we often see that AI creates a content that may not be valid, or it may be like reality, it may simulate reality, but then it is misleading. So sometimes this is known as hallucination or hallucinated results, hallucinated outcomes of AI. So when we talk about producing safety, we are trying to mitigate the problem of hallucinated outcomes and making sure that the outcomes are valid, real, and of course ethical in their usage. Okay, and having said that, talking back about the Sarvam's new model that's gaining so much predominance, it has certain features which make it very unique. First thing is it will be fluent across all Indian languages. Today a lot of people have a difficulty in accessing AI chatbots because they usually operate in English. Now sometimes they may also give you prompts in Hindi, but other vernacular languages are yet to be developed. So the good thing about Sarvam's model would be it will be fluent in understanding, processing and generating vernacular language based content. That would mean a huge possibility for Indian community. Similarly, say for example, we say India has 22 official languages and hundreds of dialects and more than 441 in general across various states. So this could mean more and more people have a better democratic access. And we are surmounting the language barrier here clearly. Of course, it also is based on the voice first approach. Now making sure that in India, there is a large segment of population that may not be able to, owing to illiteracy, owing to poor technological knowledge or owing to poor interpreting of various languages, especially the written part of the language. This model of the Sarvam will also make sure that there is a non-text based digital user base that could be better accessed by the rural population without the need of being fluent in languages when it comes to writing and understanding, talking. Then there is another thing called reasoning capacity. It is aimed at very deep application of neural networking so that the results that come by using of this particular kind of language model, they are so real and they are so accurate that it's completely based on very logical deep processing. It's not just a basic intervention, it's not just a basic suggestion, but also it gives you a detailed analysis of whatever prompt you give, whatever question you have. It will generate a very detailed and a very technically sound content. Similarly, we talk about secure deployment. A deployment would mean usage. So because it is meant for democratizing the use of AI by many more people in India, it will also make sure that there is data security, there's better data privacy. Now this is also something we spoke about just 2 weeks back in one of our DNA discussions, that today as India is talking about is digital data privacy. There is of course one more controversy when the recent RTI was under the scanner, that if we introduce RTI across all the government departments and of course all other organizations which are privately owned, then how do we talk about the data privacy? So that whole big debate that we discussed also comes in picture here, that the government through giving approval to the Sarvam is also ensuring that whichever startups are now into creating large language models should also make sure that they are taking care of basic user privacy, and data privacy is another question here. Now with that, another article of the day is talking about the Simla Pact, and why this article has becoming important is absolutely because it's coming in the backdrop of the recent India-Pakistan spat over the Kashmir issue, the killings, the terrorism that has happened. So India had decided to let go of the Indus Water Treaty. That was an agreement essentially meant to not only share but also systematically distribute the water of all the tributaries of the Indus River that makes a frontier borderline between both the nations. Of course, it was also about right water usage, damming or making canals, all of that came in picture. But then when India decided to not really cooperate with Pakistan in the light of the given terrorism attack, Pakistan is also threatening now. Pakistan says that not only the Simla Pact, but also we are ready to suspend any bilateral agreement, whether it's the Nehru-Liaquat Pact or whether it's any other pact that was ever made between both the countries, stands no solid ground now. Because we are almost in a war-like situation. That's a threat made by Pakistan. So therefore, the 1972 Simla Pact today is also seeing the same light. It is also under scanner. So this of course is important to understand the bilateral relationships, internal security, international relations, water treaty and much more from the perspective of your prelims and GS paper 2 and 3 specifically. Now more about the article, and before that a quick question from UPSC 2017. It says, what's the importance of developing the Chabahar airport by India? And then you have 4 options. The first one talks about India's trade with African countries will be increased with the development of the Chabahar port. The second says India's relations with oil producing countries of the Middle East, the Arabian countries, will be improved. The third talks about India's not depending on Pakistan anymore because it will have a direct access to Afghanistan via Central Asia. And the last option talks about how Pakistan could facilitate and protect installing gas pipeline between Iraq and India. So all these options you need to pick the right answer from. Quite related again to international relations and international bilateral treaties. Now to the article itself, the context of the article would be that just in the wake of recent tensions between both the countries, there's another escalation as India decided to suspend the Indus Water Treaty after the Pahalgam attack. Pakistan government is also saying that 1972 Shimla Agreement holds good no longer, and so do other agreements. We can suspend them. Now this also has of course raised a very important concern about what's the future like. Is a war prospect looming large? Now news were making rounds about how India is also now looking towards countries like US, Israel for more enhanced and more nuanced defense technology, and something similar was known about Pakistan. So do these you can say news or do these media airs create a kind of future threat for a war, or does it just mean once again going back to ground zero, a very poor bilateral relationship between both the countries? Because Pakistan is clearly saying that not only are we not bothered anymore about confidence building measures between the two countries, but also when it comes to LOC, the line of control, we may not respect previous treaties anymore. Okay, so that's the article comes in the light of this threat by Pakistan. And now just a little bit more about this Shimla Agreement 1972, quite a milestone treaty between both the nations that was signed between the then Indian Prime Minister Miss Indira Gandhi and the Pakistan's Premier Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. It came in the backlight of the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War, where Indian government under the Indira Gandhi's regime had supported the creation of an independent Bangladesh. So the treaty came at that point where, of course, Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, had acted as a facilitator for bringing a kind of agreement to the war that was happening in 1971. Okay, now talking about the Shimla Agreement and what really were the broad features, one most important thing was to make sure that both countries, India and Pakistan, will mutually, in a very amicable way, settle all the differences and problems between them, and they would respect all the treaties that are created in good faith mutually. Second thing was, and the most important thing of course, was regarding the LOC. It was said that the ceasefire line of 1949 would be renamed as the line of control, and both the countries would have to commit that there would be no alteration done to it until there is another final agreement that happens. So we both the countries together need to mutually respect that line of boundary. Another thing was returning the prisoners of war that come from each of these countries. So both countries would return each other's war prisoners, captives, and in that light also that was respected and it was done. Similarly, Pakistan had also agreed to recognize Bangladesh as an independent country, owing to, of course, India's efforts and negotiations. So now that Pakistanis are threatening to say take a step back, to retreat from respecting the Shimla Pact, then what could be the implications really of going back on such an important historical milestone? Well, definitely, if Pakistan does not respect the treaty anymore, it could also mean that it may not respect the LOC. It may not absolutely abide by the agreed line of control between the two nations, and in that case, India would have to look for more aggressive international intervention, arbitration here, because it's a threat to our national security, of course. Second thing is that any kind of violation of any mutual treaty between the two countries could mean that, again, once again, a fresh spate of violence in the Pakistan occupied Kashmir area. Another problem could be that in case Pakistan goes back on its claims and India were to take all these problems to international organizations, it could also mean that tomorrow India's claims on its own sovereign national territory could be opened for further investigation, debating, and discussions across international forums, which may not be in our national interest. And then, of course, it would also mean a collapse of the recent 2021 ceasefire agreement, which, after years of escalating violence, had got some semblance of peace between the two countries. And then it could also mean eroding of further trade. It could mean more breakdown of diplomatic ties. It could also mean a problem for so many fishermen or so many small hamlets and village settlers which exist in the border zone between the two countries. So of course it is a major security threat out there. And having said that, which other bilateral treaties between the two countries are actually under threat? What all does Pakistan really threaten to go back upon? So one of this, of course, is the Nehru-Liaquat Pact of 1950, which meant that both the countries would respect the minority populations of each other's territory. And already India is claiming that Pakistan has never respected the Nehru-Liaquat Pact in the spate of the violence that was happening with the Hindu community in Pakistan in the last few years. And then, of course, religious pilgrimage protocol of 1974, which meant that cross-border pilgrimage journeys or cross-border pilgrims would be allowed into their respective religious sites, and that no country would go back upon. So that is also clearly under threat now. Similar and the more dangerous one, of course, is Nuclear Installation Agreement 1988, that both the countries will mutually, in good faith, share and exchange the list of nuclear facilities that they own in order to prevent any attacks or in order to prevent any escalation on the nuclear front. And of course, it would also mean violating the airspace violation prevention agreement, so that military aircrafts do not intervene in on each other country's airspace. So that is also something that would be under threat. And then the Kartarpur Corridor Agreement 2019, which would mean that Sikh pilgrims could actually have a visa-free tour to Gurudwara Darbar Sahib that is situated in Pakistan. And then the Kartarpur Corridor, although both the countries are today saying that nobody is going to really disturb that, it will exist and the corridor would be respected, its existence would be identified, it would be acknowledged, but still, given the fact that now all the agreements are under threat, so the future of course, it looks very, very uncertain right now. And then there are many other bilateral agreements that also seem to be under the threat of suspension and disregard. Now, when we talk about violation of Simla Agreement by Pakistan, of course, it would mean funding and arming of more and more terror groups in Pakistan. That's a very valid consequence that could occur. Similarly, more military aggression, pretty much as it had happened during the Kargil War of 1999. And of course, taking Kashmir issue once again to the international forum. As I said, that's a big threat for a country's sovereignty. So UN and other countries, all of them would then approach international forums and various other international panel discussions about the Kashmir issue. So which means that ultimately a broader solution will have to be sought for the problem, and it creates a more and more of global intervention in an issue that is technically a very national issue for India. So these are certain things we are looking at, and at the end of the day, it means that it is another low point, it's another nadir in the relation of both the countries, and therefore India has to revamp not only its security but also its diplomatic and legal responses, because it becomes a huge geopolitical threat as of now. And having said that, the last article of the day talks about how Indian government is taking a very welcome, a very eco-friendly, a very sustainable initiative with regards to a wildlife sanctuary that is situated in the nearabouts of New Delhi. This is the Asola Bhati Wildlife Sanctuary. So why is the wildlife sanctuary important typically? Is because it happens to be one of the very few biodiversity spots where lots of research and innovation based activities are often undertaken in order to prevent and in order to breed, in order to preserve unique varieties of flora, fauna that India boasts of. Okay, so in that light, the Indian government has done an initiative. It is saying that we really want to protect this special biodiversity hotspot of Asola from vehicular emissions, which would mean improving the general air quality, cutting down on more noise and more you can say, air pollution in this region, which is inhabited by unique species of animals. And hence it is relevant for your UPSC exams, because for prelims it talks about environmental impact assessment, it talks about eco-friendly zones. Of course, it's very important because it's one of the provisions given under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. One of the questions from UPSC 2011 clearly talks about something similar. It says, which of the following is not a site for in situ? In situ means within, inside a particular place, method of conservation of flora, that's plants and trees. The options are Biosphere Reserve, Botanical Garden, National Park and Wildlife Sanctuaries. And with that, let's quickly look at the context of the last article for today. The article says Delhi government is quite concerned about the rising air toxicity, the negative ecological impact that's being caused in the area of Asola Bhati Wildlife Sanctuary because of using conventional, solid, polluting fuel-based vehicles such as kerosene, petrol, diesel. So all these vehicles which are operating in the entire region of the Asola and its near about areas in order to provide food for the animals or for cleaning activities or for tourism, all these vehicles are creating massive emissions. The carbon footprint of human intervention here is large, and the animals and the both flora fauna, they are all under threat. So government is saying that let's move towards a complete depending on EV segment. Let's just use electric vehicles in the area. Why and how would this help? Definitely the aim is to reduce noise, air, light pollution in the area, improve the breeding rate of the animals and preserve them, protect them, and provide a more safe and undisturbed habitat for the wildlife in the region. In future, it could have a much better fallout because it could also mean many other wildlife sanctuaries and national parks across India copying the same model. It could really work as a role model effect, in fact. So Asola Bhati Wildlife Sanctuary, just a little bit word on that. It is a very protected region in the NCR, the National Capital Region of Delhi. And also another thing too important really for the exams to remember is that it serves as a very important wildlife corridor and a biodiversity hotspot. So which means that it is a part of Delhi Ridge, the extension of Aravali Hills, located between the borders of Delhi and Haryana. It's another reason why it's very important is because it serves as a very crucial link. A wildlife corridor, we all know what it means. Technically, it means an area that is created by linking two or more national parks or sanctuaries so that animals can move freely in that area without being traversed by any roads, without being disturbed by traffic or human anthropological interventions. To create a safer place for animals to move about freely, wildlife corridors are created. And this serves as a very important corridor, a link between the Sariska National Park of Rajasthan and the Delhi Ridge. So which means a better movement of species like elephants, leopards is often witnessed here. There are two more reasons why the Asola Bhati is very important. One thing is it has a seed bank initiative. Now when I say seed bank initiative, it's a very well-known concept where this park, this sanctuary works at preserving native varieties of trees and animals and then reintroduce them as they are facing the brink of extinction. So just to preserve natural species, the banking of the genetic species. Another thing is tissue culture laboratory. This place also has a very important tissue culturing laboratory which could replicate or reproduce saplings of such trees which are now going extinct or which are facing the risk of extinction. So that's a very important thing to do. And of course, it not only houses various protected species under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, such as the nilgai, the Indian porcupine, and then vast varieties of bird species as well. Having said that, the problem was very clear because of overusage of conventional fuel-based vehicles. The area was witnessing huge pollution. Vehicles were used for official investigation, supply chain, logistical management, but at the end of the day, the emissions were dangerous. Lots and lots of animals were becoming sick. Trees, plants were wilting. The entire, you could say, the area was experiencing deterioration. And given the sheer biological importance of that area, the government has now therefore decided that why should polluting vehicles, the noise, the light created by them create problems for the animals. Not only are the animals stressed, but also their mating patterns have changed. They are reproducing at a more, you could say, at a very poor level now. Again, it could mean they would be extinct tomorrow, or they could be endangered species anytime soon. Animals hide, they don't eat, sometimes they refuse to come out of the hiding. So all these problems triggered the government, and now the government is saying that particularly it was the large mammals like leopards, deers, and smaller reptiles, sometimes they were getting very badly impacted. And no wonder the decision was taken now that let's create a very unique model where only the electronic vehicles would be used. Not only will these animals have a better habitat, safer habitat, but also it will create a role model effect for many other sanctuaries in India, that completely lets you rule out all kind of vehicular usage in such biodiverse hotspots. Now, urban green spaces, it also means that how sometimes within the urban heat islands. Now, today in the Hindu, there's another very interesting article which talks about how to mitigate the problem of ambient heat. The fact that in India, most of the metro cities nowadays are situated in such a way that around them the temperatures are manageable. But within these cities, the temperatures, because of high population density and overusage of vehicles and industries, the temperatures are shooting very high. It's uninhabitable. These are known as urban heat islands. So again, in initiatives like this, where you do not allow any kind of vehicles or pollution in the hotspots, biodiverse, green areas, garden landscapes, you could also mitigate the poor impact of urban heat island effect. That's another thing to understand. And then of course public awareness. It is also a very good, you could say, testimony to the public to learn from, that sometimes changes in your mobility patterns, adopting a nice, safer and a cleaner transportation could also mean volumes to protect your ecology, flora, fauna, and of course even human life. So that's the whole beauty of the intervention here. And now let's quickly talk about the mains practice question of the day. Question says that, and of course it's based on the first article that we covered regarding India's move of creating a demand where we are now asking for more extra 10,000 square kilometers of maritime area in the Arabian Sea. So in that regard, the question says India's strategic move to extend its previous claim and now demand for a more continental shelf in the Arabian Sea, it's just reflecting the growing importance of maritime resources and security. Discuss the legal framework, significance and challenges involved in extending India's claim, the continental shelf claim. So clearly the question is talking about an analysis of 2-3 things here. Let's begin with the introduction. In the introduction, we must first talk about that how maritime boundaries are recognized globally under the UNCLOS 1982 protocol. We must also highlight how historically India had raised such demands, say back in 2009, back in 2021, which was interjected to by Pakistan, and of course now the recent claim is a very strategic one, because deliberately it has been made in such a manner that it avoids the scope of any other territorial dispute. This we need to talk about in the introduction. Of course, in the introduction you must also mention a little bit about the CLCS, that how CLCS works as a very specialized unit within the UNCLOS and takes decisions regarding accepting or rejecting a country's claims on extending its continental shelf. With that, we'll switch to the body of the answer writing, and here it's time to actually talk about what's the strategic importance really of such a claim. Why would India want to make a claim like this? So clearly there are two things here. One, of course, is security. Now, given the geostrategic importance of the IOR region, the Indian Ocean Rim region, of course you could also a little bit hint at the IORA here, the Indian Ocean region, and all the countries associated in the region. And then you could mention about how, as a galloping economy, of course India's situation in such a crucial geographical area asks for the fact that India must promote its security. So not only to improve its national defense is this claim important, but a more important thing here is to talk about the blue economy. Now, what is a blue economy really? We need to explain a little bit about a blue economy which functions upon the intention of using ocean resources and ocean minerals in order to promote its economic growth, but in such a way that you preserve the ocean in a very sustainable way. So your use should be very sustainable. So today India must as a growing economy, focus on its maritime strength. So that is something that we need to talk about, that India's demand is being driven by these two reasons. One is security, and the other, of course, happens to be your blue economy demand. And with that, we can then proceed with the conclusion, where a little bit we could highlight the challenges associated with it, that how in the past, when India had made a claim like this in 2021, the Sir Creeks dispute came in the picture. Now here it's also interesting to note that India has had similar agreements with countries like, say, Oman, which also shares a part of continental shelf with India. We could talk about Sri Lanka. These two countries could also be used as an example of how amicably sometimes mutual bilateral agreements can ensure that both countries can safely have a jurisdiction and clear-cut decisions about recognizing each other's international boundaries so that future disputes are avoided. Of course, with Pakistan, something similar is not happening, so that's yet to be seen exactly what are the ramifications of this demand made by India. And then we could conclude the answer by saying that going forward, since blue economy is the way to go, it's a very futuristic plan. So therefore, what could India do to make sure that in coming times also our maritime defense security is maintained and we are able to explore and use our, you know, autonomous regions without interference from other countries? So a clear-cut demand so that under the UNCLOS, there is an undisputed recognition and identification of our territory, so that future disputes and any kind of confrontations can be avoided. And on that note, we could finish the question. And with this, of course, you have more prelims practice questions associated here, which you could try. You could, of course, post your responses in the comment box. You could also let us know if there's anything specific that you're looking for, that you could, find yourself assisted by, something that we could do for you. Of course, what's your general feedback about the analysis, any article that you would want to be covered in more detail, something that fascinates you for the coming exams. And on that note, I'll take a leave for the DNA segment of the day. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope to see you many more times through these interesting sessions in the future. So keep commenting, like us, subscribe us, follow us, and support us in this journey of making your dream come true. Thank you.
Inland industry and